Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. The Tough Girl podcast is sponsorship and ad-free, and that is thanks to the monthly financial support of patrons. To find out more about supporting the Tough Girl podcast and becoming a patron, please check out Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast. Help me to increase the amount of female role models in the media. All patrons will get their name on a dedicated patrons page on the Tough Girl website. All female patrons, $5 and above, are invited to join the closed Facebook group, the Tough Girl Tribe. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Dr. Gait Edwards and Dr. Blair Green, who are going to be sharing more about their new book, Go Ahead, Stop and Pee, Running During Pregnancy and Postpartum.
My name is Dr. Blair Green. I am a physical therapist. I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia in the US, and I've been practicing for close to 20 years now. My practice focuses on women, almost exclusively women. I work with women with orthopedic problems and pelvic health problems. So I see a lot of women during pregnancy, immediately after pregnancy, and then even years later. So dealing with issues like urinary incontinence and leaking, or pelvic pain, and a lot of other issues, hip and back pain, as it relates to all of that as well.
Every time you say 20 years, I'm shocked, Blair. You're so young. I'm Dr. Gait Edwards. I also live in Atlanta and own a practice that's a private practice. We primarily treat runners and triathletes, but almost exclusively athletes. And I don't remember how long I've been practicing, not quite as long as Blair, but a long time. And I also teach at a university about endurance athletes, specifically runners and triathletes. And Blair and I often co-treat our pregnant and postpartum runners. So I'll send them for the pelvic floor issues, and I will get them back to running and working them through their gait analysis and other higher level orthopedic things. So I think we make a pretty good team.
Absolutely. And such a good team. You wrote a book about it, Go Ahead, Stop and Pee, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I'd love to find out a little bit more about sort of your running backstories, like how you got into running, what type of running that you do. Blair? Sure.
So my running journey started when I was in graduate school. Graduate school can be very stressful. And so I had a friend who was training for and ran a lot of marathons, and she would take me out on training runs with her. And we had this little loop we would do. We were living in Philadelphia at the time, and there's a beautiful river there. So we could leave our apartment, run about a mile or so to the river, run right along the river and back. And so that's what really got me started with running. I would call myself a recreational runner. I didn't do any races until maybe several years after that, when I did my first 10K race, which was a big one here in Atlanta. It's the country's biggest 10K. I don't know if it's the world's biggest 10K, called the Peachtree Road Race. It's every year on the 4th of July. And so that's what got me started with racing. But again, just really a recreational runner. And I would set myself races so that I could have a goal, because I found that if I didn't have a goal, I wasn't going to run. So if I knew I had this race coming up, I'd have to train for the race. And running then became something I would do with my girlfriends after we had kids. It was an easy way to stay connected with my friends and be social when we were all sort of just in the throes of infants and toddlers and trying to manage work and life and how we're going to fit things in. So it became our social outlet in addition to being our exercise outlet. I've run a couple half marathons, which I did as well with my girlfriends. Again, it's great to plan a girls' trip that centers around a running focused event, because it keeps us all active and gives us a goal. And then now, as I've transitioned years later, my running has changed even more. I'm kind of transitioning out of races and just more into some interval type training and some running that way. I think just as my body changes and my mental focus changes, I find ways to keep running in my life, even though it's a little bit different maybe than what it looked like 5 or 10 or even 20 years ago.
And Kate, what's your running journey been like?
Yeah, so mine's a little bit different. And I've run for a long, long time. So I started running when I was young. The school that I went to growing up was too small to have a cross country team or a track team, which is kind of crazy. But so I didn't run in high school on a team, but I ran by myself in my town, and I would do 1 or 2 miles to start. And then it wasn't until college that I started racing. And the first race that I ever did was actually a half marathon. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well go big. So I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, absolutely no idea. I did everything that you can imagine wrong. I wore brand new shoes. I went out too fast. The goo that I ate while I was running, I didn't have before the race. I did everything you could imagine that was absolutely wrong, but I loved it. And I became addicted to racing at that point. So fast forward, I continued to race through college, doing mostly half marathons. It was a distance that I really liked. And after college, I joined team in training. My brother is a leukemia survivor. So I did my first marathon for team in training, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And that was in San Diego. So I did the San Diego Rock and Roll Marathon. And again, I fell completely in love with everything about it. You know, running is an identity, and it becomes everything to you, at least for some people, and it did for me. Your friends are runners. You eat certain things because of what you're doing to run. You wear certain things because of your running. So for me, it became a lifestyle at that point. And since then, I did 13 marathons, 3 Boston marathons. I qualified and ran for Boston. And then I did other things like the 24-hour races. So there was a race called Reach the Beach. It's now run by Ragnar in the United States, but it was in New Hampshire, and it would be from the mountains to the ocean, and it was a team race. So we would we'd get these vans, and all of us would do different components of the course, and it was really incredible. So I did things like that and some trail running, and then I got into triathlon. And I've done sprint triathlon and Olympic triathlon, but then I tried to do a half Ironman, and the first time I got a major concussion, so I wasn't able to do it. The second time I got pregnant right in the beginning of triathlon training, so I chose not to do it because I hadn't ever done that distance before. And the third time is a much longer story for another day, but I almost died training for it because of a rare genetic heart disease that I found out about. So I trained and ran all through pregnancy. I did a half marathon when I was 6 months pregnant, I believe. And then I continued to run and race until I couldn't really consider it running anymore. It was almost like a waddle. I'm not really sure if I was running or walking, but I think it was right up until 2 weeks before I gave birth. So running for me has been my lifestyle for a really long time. And I've done everything from a 5K all the way to a marathon and trail races and everything in between.
I think what's so great is that you're both, you've got a passion for running, but you've also got the knowledge behind it, being physical therapists and being doctors and working in the industry for you, Blair, 20 odd years. And so I think it's so amazing to get your voices out there. And one of the things I'd love to start with is just, you must hear so many common myths about running while pregnant and running after postpartum. And I'd love for you maybe share just a couple of I was going to say your favorite ones that you sort of oh no, that's not quite true.
I'll start with one of my favorite ones, because one of the things that drove me crazy when I was running during pregnancy was everybody would say, "Why are you still running? Doesn't that increase the stress on the baby? I don't think running is a good idea for you." That was the myth, but it was also my reality, people asking me all the time. And the truth is that for healthy women, exercising during pregnancy is actually a really good thing. There are so many benefits to exercising during pregnancy. It can decrease your risk for cesarean delivery, gestational diabetes, preeclampsia. It can decrease musculoskeletal pain, and even improve the birth weight for the baby, making delivery easier. So running during pregnancy is actually a huge benefit, but the general public sometimes doesn't see it that way.
Yeah.
So I'll take a postpartum myth, since Kate discussed probably what's easily the biggest myth during pregnancy. For me, what the biggest myth during postpartum with running is that women who have babies are going to leak urine when they run for the rest of their lives. So this is another big myth, that while we know this is so common, it's not normal for women to leak after they have babies. And there's actually a lot we can do to help women who maybe are leaking or who are concerned about having problems with urinary leakage after babies to help them really resolve those problems. And I'm sure we'll get into this more as we go along, but running and exercise in general can be a stress on the pelvic floor for a number of reasons, whether or not you're pregnant. And the physical changes of pregnancy just exacerbate that a little bit. The reality is that a lot of women don't have problems after they run, and that by really working on certain muscle strengthening and retraining programs, a lot of the women that do have these problems can actually help themselves after pregnancy. So we can, as physical therapists and other fitness professionals, we can really help women get away from that, so that doesn't have to be the new normal for women who have babies and think they're just going to leak for the rest of their lives every time they try to run or jump on a trampoline or do any type of impact exercise.
So what advice is it to women who've just found out they're pregnant, and maybe they are like quite worried about sort of running or continuing to run or starting to run? What's the key things that they need to remember?
I think there are a few things, but they should continue exercising if they feel good and it's okay with their physician. The biggest thing is keep moving, keep doing what you're doing, and listen to your body. Your body will tell you when you need to back off. One of the things we tell people is that if you're running during pregnancy, you should be able to talk the entire time. So you don't have to monitor your heart rate necessarily, but if you can hold a conversation with your running partner, then you are probably in a good area, like you're not pushing yourself too hard. So listen to your body and make sure that you can talk, and make sure you're cleared from your physician if you have any other underlying medical issues.
Yeah. One thing I really want to get into is, can we talk about the pelvic floor muscles? Because I think sometimes people hear about the pelvic floor and it's like, what is this? I know I should be exercising it, or I should be doing something to it. Because it's probably something we don't really talk about, like pelvic health. It's not something I would go to my personal trainer and be like, I want to work on my pelvic health. I'm like, I want to get strong glutes and I want to be able to do pull-ups and lift heavy weights. So it's probably, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that is something that people go and speak to their personal trainers about. But yeah, pelvic floor muscles, like, what do they do? Where are they?
Sure. So the pelvic floor muscles. So I think that's one thing we probably need to clarify, is that when we talk about the pelvic floor, we are typically talking about a group of muscles. And those muscles are, they're situated in our body. They kind of sling, they almost make like a hammock type structure between the pubic bone and the tailbone. So they are the most inferior muscles in our body. And if you can almost think of it like a bowl. So sometimes it's hard when you can't see it to think three-dimensionally, but they're almost like this bowl or hammock that sit at the bottom of the pelvis. And what the pelvic floor muscles do, they actually have several functions. As we know, they're involved in urinary and defecatory control, so helping us with going to the bathroom. They also have a role in sexual function. So these are the muscles that help us with arousal, they help us with orgasm and sexual function. They also help us with stability. So what a lot of people don't realize is that they are actually part of the core. So when we talk about the pelvic floor muscles, and before I go into that deeper, let me also say they provide pelvic organ support. So again, they're sitting on the bottom of the pelvis and they're helping to support all of our pelvic organs as well. So when we're doing any kind of motion, activity, exercise, that's what's helping keep our organs where they need to be from a muscular standpoint. So when we go into stability, we're talking about how these muscles, like I said, they're part of the core. So they're working on their own, but also with the abdominal muscles, with the low back muscles, and also with the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is the muscle that helps us breathe. And I think the part that blows my mind every time is how just naturally the diaphragm and the pelvic floor muscles work together. So it's a really cool thing, because I think while it might be hard for a lot of people to really talk about their pelvic floors and what's going on with their pelvic floor, what we found is that we can actually use our diaphragm and breathing to help retrain these muscles also. But going back to the pelvic floor muscles specifically, I think what's important to remember is that they are a group of muscles. And sometimes people have a hard time with that because we can't see them. It's not like your quads or your glutes or your biceps. It's like muscles on the inside that we don't see. But because they're only muscles, there's a lot we can do to keep them strong and keep them healthy from an exercise standpoint.
You know what I'd like to add, Blair, is just bringing up that whole idea of the breath, which you spoke about. I think for those of us or people that don't treat the pelvic floor, so for you, speaking about the pelvic floor is so natural and really thinking about it. But for people who don't see it and think about it as much all the time, it's almost easier to think about the breath for the everyday person. If you add diaphragmatic breath to your exercises, or you're thinking about how you're breathing, you're actually able to get that pelvic floor working and doing what it needs to do a little bit more without having to really focus on it specifically. So I often add breathing exercises to all of the exercises that I teach, whether it be squatting or single leg exercises for my runners, but also directly postpartum, we really just sit and think about breathing through the diaphragm. And a lot of times that will help improve the function of the pelvic floor as well.
What is the fourth trimester?
It's a great question. So when we think about pregnancy, it's essentially 40 weeks. So the way that we group the physiological changes that are happening during pregnancy is within trimesters. So for approximately 13 weeks, we have 3 trimesters of pregnancy. You know, during the first trimester, many women don't even realize that they're pregnant. And a lot of those changes are happening internally. So blood volumes increasing and ligaments are starting to become more lax, and the body is preparing itself for pregnancy. In the second trimester, that's typically where we start to see more of the physical changes of pregnancy, weight gain, postural changes, etc. And then by the third trimester, that is typically where the baby is doing the most growth. So the baby's gaining a lot of weight on a week-by-week basis, and the lungs are finishing maturing. So the baby's ready to be born. What we talk about when we talk about the fourth trimester, it's really the 3 months when you talk about it in a trimester standpoint factor, but that immediate postpartum period. So Kate and I, we always like to say postpartum is forever, right? So your body changes when you have a baby. It doesn't mean that it's better or worse. It's just different than what it was before you had the baby. When we talk about that fourth trimester, that's that time right after the baby's born. So the body is still undergoing tremendous change in the capacity of healing itself. So the muscles are of the pelvic floor healing themselves. If there was a vaginal delivery, the uterus is starting to contract back down. The blood volume is starting to go back to normal. We're losing a lot of fluid as our bodies are transitioning back to what was a pre-pregnancy state. And so that time, because there's so much tremendous physical change going on in the body, it's important that women realize that it's not just like you have your baby and then you're back to where you were before. That's really a good time for women to be aware of what's happening in their bodies, both physically and emotionally, and really take the time to recover properly, just like you would recover from any type of injury or surgery or whatever change you're having to your body. So we just like to think of it as this extra 3 months when the body is transitioning back to its pre-pregnancy state.
I'd love to hear more about what it was like for both of you after you'd given birth and had your babies. What was it like? How easy was it to get back into exercise? I'm literally like, well, you're breastfeeding. I was like, I don't know. I don't even need to know that. That's not really a part of it.
Well, it's part of it though.
Yeah. I mean, could you just share more about that time, especially also, I suppose, coming from your background of science and all this previous knowledge that you had? Was it what you expected it to be like?
Sure. So the first thing I'd like to say is the reason that we wrote this book, or one of the many reasons we wrote this book, was because even as healthcare practitioners, we found that after we had our babies, there was just no information available. And the information that was out there, even though we knew how to dig for it, was just not very good. So that's really why we did this. My experience of having returning to running and exercise after having a baby was actually very good, because Blair and I actually used to work together, so in the same office. And when I had my baby, I knew that I would go get pelvic health PT within 8 weeks after I had my son. And I feel like I had pretty good base knowledge. Again, like I said, we had to really dig for what to do, but I had a little bit of base knowledge, which was helpful. After I had my son, I started walking almost immediately. I had a regular vaginal birth. It was all natural, no drugs. So I actually recuperated pretty quickly from an overall standpoint. And probably by week 2, I started walking. And when I say started walking, I mean I started with 10 or 15 minutes just to get out of the house multiple times a day. I just felt trapped, to be honest with you. So I started with the walking, and I also started with my diaphragmatic breathing and pelvic tilts and just doing really basic, easy exercises at home. And then within a couple of weeks, I was walking several miles and increasing the exercises that I did at home. Again, always adding the breath to it. And then probably, I think that I can't remember the exact time I started running, but it was earlier than I probably should have, because I'm addicted to running. And even though I knew better, I just couldn't wait to get out there. So even though I'm a physical therapist, I unfortunately couldn't control myself. I started probably about 5 weeks, and I went out for a run, and it felt so good that I just kept going. And I took my stroller with me, and my son was in the stroller, so that adds a lot of weight. And I ran as much as possible. And then I ended up with a stress fracture because I didn't listen to my body or, follow good advice that I often give other people. And I was in a boot for a few weeks. And then at that point, I realized that I needed to back down and give my body the rest that it was asking for. And so I started back slowly again. The other thing is I was breastfeeding the entire time. And one of the things that we talk about in our book, and it's very common, is that you're actually at higher risk for stress fractures when you're breastfeeding, because the calcium that's usually in your bones is mobilized to create milk. And because of that, you're a little bit higher risk. So for me, I, did everything right initially in terms of starting slowly and doing the exercise. But then as soon as I got that feeling of freedom and the idea of running, everything went to hell.
What about you, Blair?
It's funny because I would probably echo the same thing. It's like you're a professional and we treat pregnant women and postpartum women all the time. But then when it comes to your own experience, you kind of take all logic and reasoning and throw it out the window and do everything wrong because you think that you're better than the science that you know. And my experience was probably a little bit better than Kate's, and again, very different. I think it's good actually that we have such different backgrounds and different experiences, because it just goes to show you that everybody's a little bit different and no two pregnancies are the same and no two women are the same. So I have 2 children and both of my children were born via C-section. So I had a completely different recovery experience just in the fact that I did have C-sections, and I had to wait a little bit longer until I could really be more active because the incision and the surgery had to heal. So I remember, especially with my son, who was my first, he's my older one. I remember being at home and thinking, gosh, can I do this? Can I do that? Is it okay to do pelvic tilts? Is it okay to do, just some basic bridging type exercises? Because I was so concerned about my abdomen healing properly. And I wasn't as concerned about my pelvic floor. And I'll also add, he was preemie. He was a 33-week premature baby. So I didn't have as much stress on my muscles because I had a lot less of pregnancy the first time around than most people do. So the pelvic floor wasn't as big of an issue for me as the abdominal wall. And so, but again, I started back slowly. And at that 6-week mark, I was like, okay, I'm ready to run. And it was the same thing. I didn't think about running like a run walk program, which is what we talk about a lot in the book, or just kind of starting slow and making sure that I had good hip strength and the good ability to stand and balance on one leg and just do some light jumping. I kind of just went out there and was like, okay, time to try running. And that's what I did. And so that was, probably a big mistake for me. Fortunately, there were no injuries that first time around. My injury actually happened between my 2 pregnancies. And so that made a difference the second time around. I ran my first half marathon when my son was a year old. And I had a hip injury during that time. Actually, during the race, I had a hamstring pulled it was like in mile 12 of 13. So that kind of stunk in my first half marathon, but I got through it. But what happened from that point on was my hips were hurting and it was really hard to run. And I was still trying to push through it. So my second pregnancy, I didn't run much at all because my hip hurt. But what I found was really interesting, and this is where all logic kind of gets thrown out the door, was I didn't run for most of my pregnancy. And then at that 6-week mark after my daughter was born, I was like, okay, well, I've rested for a really long time. Surely this isn't going to be a problem anymore. And I thought it was so interesting that I'll never forget that first step on the treadmill, that first day I tried to run, all the pain that had been gone for all those months came right back. And so my recovery from my second pregnancy was really more about how do I keep my hip from hurting and get back to running. And it took years. I mean, this was not months, this was years. And I'm happy to say now I can run without pain. But again, all these things that you think you're going to experience because you're the professional and because you know how to treat these things doesn't mean that you're exempt from it happening in your own body.
Blair, I think that the thing that we both said was we were both so excited to start running that we just did it and we didn't really follow a plan. And I think that's why we were so clear in our book about a plan, because after I got my stress fracture and returned back to running, I did follow a run walk plan and I did do the things that we outline in our book. And then I was completely fine and I recovered quickly and was able to race again. And I think that looking back, if I had just done that initially, I would have actually gotten back to running sooner and not had to take a break because of stress fracture. And I think that I like to tell that story to my clients because oftentimes they'll say, oh, okay, fine, I'll listen to you, rather than just go back out. And then they are able to return to running fine. So yeah, even though we're professionals, we made mistakes too, but that's part of what we wrote about and learned from.
Yeah. What do new mothers need to know in order to understand and care for their bodies after pregnancy? I don't know if you each want to give like a couple of just 1 or 2 top tips.
Sure. So I think the number one thing is, again, listen to your body and be graceful with yourself. I think a lot of times we push and push and push. And because of that, we end up getting in trouble or injured. So really try to remember that you did this amazing thing. You created a human. I mean, that's what you did. And because of that, you really have to give yourself the rest that you need. Go out slowly. You are not the same person you were before you had a baby. So if you were training for a marathon or ran a marathon right before you got pregnant, that doesn't mean that when you go back to running, you're in the same shape and you should go out and run 10 miles. You have to start from scratch. So I think that's one thing. And then the other one is make sure you are eating enough. Make sure you're drinking enough water and hydrating, especially if you're a breastfeeding mom. You need an additional 500 calories a day if you're breastfeeding. And if you don't get that extra caloric intake and hydrate enough, your milk will dry up. It has nothing to do with the exercise. It has everything to do with your nutrition and your hydration. So just be aware of those small things.
Yeah. And then I think I'd like to add also, I always tell people kind of like what Kate just said, it's important to go slow, but it's also important to build a foundation. So while we're going through those first couple weeks and months after giving birth, making sure that you're taking the time to really work on your core, work on, your abdominal, your basic abdominal function and your pelvic floor. And that we talked about that deep diaphragmatic breathing. And I'll go back to that again. That's something you can start working on day one. That's not going to hurt your body. That's actually probably going to help your recovery because breathing helps bring oxygen to all of our muscles and all parts of our body. So working on getting that diaphragm moving and breathing and letting that help your pelvic floor, and then slowly building up your hip strength, your core strength, so that when you do go to run, those muscles they're ready for what's going to come next. I think it's also important to remember that if you're breastfeeding, a lot of the hormonal changes that have happened during pregnancy just become prolonged. So one bit of advice that I like to give to all of my postpartum moms is if you are breastfeeding, know that there may be more ligamentous laxity in your body. So again, just another reason why it's important for our muscles to work in the best capacity that they can, but that probably will persist for on average about 6 months after you stop breastfeeding. So your body is still going through tremendous change, and it's important to recognize that and kind of build that foundation to work on. And then if you are having problems or if you're any concerns, even before there's a problem, go get help. There are pelvic health physical therapists all over the world that are ready and willing to help moms get back. And so don't be afraid to say, hey, I might need some help, or hey, I just want to get this checked out, and make sure that you're doing the things that you can do to make your body the best it can be as you go back.
Blair, I think other than just say, if you're worried getting checked out, I always tell my clients to, at 8 weeks postpartum, to go get a pelvic health check. Just because for me, I didn't have any issues, but when I came to see you, I still had a lot of tightness on one side of my pelvic floor. And what I see down the road with a lot of runners, 5 years, 6 years, or even 10 or 12 years postpartum, is that they have issues like hip pain or back pain or whatever it is. And sometimes it relates back to that pelvic floor, and not having it looked at or assessed initially probably put them at risk.
Is that like an internal check?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. It is. Oh. Yes. So as I mentioned before, those muscles are on the inside of the body. So the only way we really know what's happening with them is to feel them from the inside. So it's not like when you go to the gynecologist and they get out the speculum and it's sort of like this uncomfortable thing. It usually involves just one gloved finger. So I wear gloves all the time. I think pretty much every PT wears gloves all the time. And it's just inserting one finger into the vagina. And what we can do is we can feel what's going on. So is there tightness in the muscles? A lot of times it's not that the muscles are weak. It's that there's actually some tightness or some overactivity in the muscles. So we can feel that just like you would feel other muscles on the body. We can also feel for whether or not the muscles are doing their job in terms of contracting and relaxing, because sometimes it's a matter of these muscles contract and they forget how to let go. So these muscles work almost like a trampoline, right? Like they need to be able to tighten up and support, but at the same time, they need to be able to lengthen and relax so that when we land, they can absorb that load a little bit. So we check all of that primarily internally, but then we do some external checks as well.
because I'm just starting to think, because I haven't had a baby, but I'm starting to think, wonder how what my pelvic floor health is like. I'm like, I quite want to know now, and be like, I wonder if it's impacting on other areas. Sorry, that was a bit of a diversion.
No, well, I think, honestly, Sarah, women and men have pelvic floor tightness or issues, even, if they haven't had a baby. So sometimes hip pain or back pain or other things like that are related to the pelvic floor, even if you haven't had a baby. So just something to think about.
Yeah. No, I have like a lot of problems with like my glutes, and my hip flexors are too tight and everything else.
Yeah.
And, trying to engage my core. And I'm starting to think, I wonder what I think I'm going to put that on my to-do list.
You should, absolutely.
Yeah.
Look at your breathing, make sure you can breathe diaphragmatically, look at your posture as your rib cage over your pelvis, and then can you maintain that during exercise, and get a pelvic health check.
We're talking about running, and one of the things that I've sort of noticed is lots of mums running with strollers or prams. I was just wondering, what your thoughts are with that. Is that something, obviously, I imagine you've got to build up to it. Does it impact on the baby? Is there a certain age that you should be doing it? Because I think I also read or saw that there was like a mum of 3 who was running a stroller and got like a new half marathon record or a marathon record.
It's incredible.
Yeah, amazing. But I just love to know your thoughts about, running with a stroller. Is that something that both of you have done?
Sure. So yes, I ran with a stroller, and I ran with a single stroller, and I've pushed my friends' double strollers in the past, but I've never run with 3, which I just can't even imagine. So I think running with a stroller is fine, because you have to think of it, what is the cost-benefit ratio? And the truth is, the benefit of getting out of the house and being able to exercise absolutely outweighs anything else in my mind. I mean, the mental health component of it. From a physical standpoint, there are a couple things. So there are different pieces that you can add to your stroller to allow you to bring newborns, where you can put them their car seat and attach it into the stroller. So you can start very soon. Again, we suggest you wait at least 6 to 8 weeks before you start running. But if you really do want to get out there, you can put them in the stroller, and they can be very safe early on. But then there's the whole postural piece. So if you're pushing a stroller, it's heavy and it's awkward. In our normal running gait, our arms swing by our side. They're supposed to swing from about the height of your heart down to like your pocket, your pants pocket. And so in a normal running gait, that happens, and it helps move your spine, and it allows one leg to go forward in front and get good hip extension, all of these things that are within a good running gait. But when you run with a stroller, what happens is that your arms don't move because you're pushing the stroller. And oftentimes women or men running with a stroller will bend forward from the hips, which will load that posterior chain, or the back of the body, the nervous system, as well as the back. You'll often have decreased hip extension, and your pelvis actually might tilt forward a lot more. So there are several things that can happen running with a stroller. So what we suggest is that make sure that you keep the stroller close to you, so as close as possible. Try not to let it get really far ahead of you where you're bending forward and really leaning forward. And then if you can, push with one arm and then switch side to side. And then again, try to keep that rib cage over the pelvis. The other thing I suggest that is, if you have a partner that you run with, initially when you start running, ask your partner to push the stroller. You don't have to do it. They didn't have a baby. Let them do the pushing, because their body is a little bit stronger and probably can do a better job initially. So that's what I often tell people.
Yeah. And I'm also going to add in, I'll do a little plug for Gait here. She's got this amazing YouTube video where she describes this whole thing. And I believe it's your practice it's the Precision Physical Therapy YouTube, if I'm correct.
You're right. I keep forgetting about that video, and you keep bringing it up. Thank you.
I send it to all my patients. Every time I have someone come in, I tell them what to do. And then I say, here's a link to this YouTube video that's going to explain everything. So for anyone listening, if they want to check out that video on YouTube, it's Precision Physical Therapy.
Sarah, I'll send you the link.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'll add it into the show notes.
Yeah, we'll do that. That'll be easier. Thanks.
Fantastic. And I'd love to for you each to give your top exercise that a woman could do when she starts back sort of doing postpartum workouts. And I know obviously it's very, very different for every woman, and every situation is different, but just, maybe what your favorite exercise was when you started back, working out.
Sure. Gosh, I have so many favorites. I don't know where you want me to start, but I think if we take it back to basics, and I know we've said this a couple times, but I just have to reinforce that deep diaphragmatic breathing is absolutely the place to start. Like I said, it's something you can do day one. So it's not something that you really have to wait for your body to recover to do. And the way I like to think about it is when you're breathing, when you inhale, what you should feel, we all have heard about these deep belly breaths like you see in yoga, but what I want you to think about is not just about the belly expanding, but also the ribs expanding. So sometimes I like to think of it as like an umbrella, where when we breathe in, that's like the umbrella opening up. And so we get this kind of up and out movement of the ribs as the belly is rising and as there's a little bit of chest rise as well. And then as we exhale, the exact opposite should happen. So there should be a little bit of drop of the chest. Those ribs should move down and in, and the belly should drop as well. So that's almost like that closing of the umbrella. And in terms of just doing a slow breathing exercise, sometimes the best way to count it out is to breathe in for a count of 4 and breathe out for a count of 4. And that would just be a basic breathing exercise just to get the diaphragm going. The second thing I'd like to add on top of that is a pelvic tilt or a pelvic clock type exercise to get the low back, the hips, and the pelvis moving. So imagining that you took a clock off your wall and stuck it right on top of your pelvis. So 12 o'clock's up towards your face, 6 o'clock is down toward your feet, and then your left and right hips are the 3 and 9 o'clock. And being able to continue that breathing effort as you're moving your pelvis through that clock-like motion. I think this is the best way to start initially. And I'll defer to Kate for the next couple exercises in terms of maybe adding some progressions onto that.
Yeah, so I give both those or all of those exercises initially as well, but I'm going to kind of go in a different direction because we're talking about running and preparing to run. One of the other things I like to do fairly early on is start getting people used to being on one leg, because running is essentially jumping from one leg to the other. So I ask all my clients to do their exercises barefoot because I like them to use the intrinsics of their feet. So the small muscles within their feet kind of act as a core of the foot. So I ask them to start practicing balancing on one leg in bare feet, making sure that they're doing it in front of a mirror and keeping their pelvis even, and then having to breathe while they're controlling their foot and their pelvis. That may sound very easy standing on one leg, but if you really break it down and focus on those 3 areas, it becomes very difficult, because oftentimes people are able to breathe, but then they can't keep their foot in a neutral position, or they start to fall over and their hips drop. So that would be the first thing. And then if people are able to do that, once they can do that, they can start using the other leg and move it more dynamically as if it's moving through a running motion. I like to do that again because it is more functional. There are plenty of other glute exercises out there, but it's pretty basic in terms of understanding, and it targets several different things.
Kate and Blair sent me a copy of their book, Go Ahead, Stop and Pee, Running During Pregnancy and Postpartum, and it is jam-packed filled with so much information from sharing their own runner stories and dispelling pregnancy myths and pelvic health and exercise for pregnant runners. There is links at the back with references. There's also this great sort of a return to running, like when to train, so like a scheduling program that you can follow. There's pictures of all the exercises. So highly, highly recommend the book to any women who are pregnant or running and postpartum pregnancies. But Blair and Kate, where's the best place for more people to find more information about you, to find your practices, to follow you on social media?
My practice is precisionpt.org, and we have an Instagram handle, which is at precision. Blair, what is it?
Hold on, I'm looking it up. Give me a
Okay.
sec.
So,
Yours is precision PT _ ATL.
That's right. And then I have another one, which is at Kate Mahivik Edwards, which is KATEMIHEVC Edwards. And that one, I talk a lot about exercise and running, and I do a lot more of my talking about the books and things like that.
And then my practice is Catalyst Physical Therapy. Our website is catalystga.com. And on Facebook and Instagram, we are at Catalyst _GA. So you can certainly find us there. I will also add that we have a Facebook page and an Instagram page for our book where we put links to all of the podcasts we might be on and the articles that we're writing. And we share some tips and we share some things that are in the news as it relates to moms and pregnant women and running. And that Instagram and Facebook is at Go Ahead Stop and Pee. It's an easy one to remember and an easy one to find. And we would love to connect with anybody there.
Yep. Oh, fantastic. And I'll make sure I put all of the links to the websites and the social media pages because, 63% of runners are women, and there is actually this massive lack of information when it comes to pregnancy and running. So anything that we can do to encourage more women to gain the knowledge that they need to feel comfortable to go out running during pregnancy and postpartum is absolutely incredible. Before we leave, I'd love just to hand it back over to you, to each of you, just to share final words of advice, wherever you want to take us, what you'd like other mothers and runners to know. Blair, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Final words of advice is, stay active and do what feels good for you. I think it's so important that as women, we support each other. As moms, we support each other. So find a friend to run with, find someone to work out with. If you live somewhere where you can't, there's not a lot of people around, connect online and find a way to just stay active and do what feels good to you, even if it means slowing down, even if it means doing something different. Take time to really be good to your body. And part of that is staying active and staying running. And my final plug, after your baby is born, if you're listening to this and you're pregnant, or if you've just had a baby, find a pelvic health physical therapist and have them check you out, because while 95% of the time there is nothing wrong, just having the recommendations and advice can really go a long way in terms of your current and your future pelvic health moving forward.
Yeah. And I'll go with, I think what you said, Blair, is incredible and amazing. I am in complete agreement. But the other thing is listen to your body. Your body will tell you when you're ready to do something. And I know, because I've done everything wrong as well as a lot of things right, that there was always a little voice in my head that said, you better not do this. And I did it anyway. So really listen to your body and be kind to yourself. Again, I think many, many times as moms and women, we push ourselves beyond what we really need to because we feel like we have to. So take a step back, listen to your body, take care of yourself. And then the other thing is, yes, get a pelvic health exam if you can. And also, if you're a runner, do an online or in-person running gait analysis. We do online running analysis, form analysis through my practice at precisionpt.org, because your running gait is going to change and things are going to be different. And sometimes it just takes one or two comments like, hey, why don't you try this? Or you just need to add this one exercise to make a huge difference and allow you to continue exercising without injury.
Thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast to share more about running and pregnancy and postpartum. I do find it absolutely fascinating, and it is so, so important to shine a light on what women should expect and how their body should feel and what is normal. Keep doing such incredible work, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah.
Hey Tribe, I hope you enjoyed the episode with Dr. Kate and Dr. Blair. I absolutely love what they are doing and the knowledge that they are sharing. Everything that we've talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com. So please do go check that out. If you're brand new to the Tough Girl podcast, thank you so much for listening. If you go and visit toughgirlchallenges.com, that is basically the main hub, the central hub where all of the information is held. On there, there's like 4 different tabs, Tough Girl, and underneath the Tough Girl tab, it gives you a little bit more information about me and my background, but it also shares more details of some of the previous challenges that I've done, from hiking the Overland Track in 2020, the Lycian Way over in Turkey, Camino Portuguese, through hiking the Appalachian Trail, running the Marathon des Sables. I also share smaller adventures and challenges. There is also the patrons page. So if you're a patron and supporter of the Tough Girl podcast, that's where you can go and see your name. There's more details about getting in contact with me or working with me. I have the Tough Girl podcast tab, and then basically the podcast is broken down into different seasons, which is basically done by year. So you've got the 2019 episodes, 2018, 2017, 2016, 2015. There's also one for Tough Girl Extra. Tough Girl Extra is when we go back and catch up with previous guests that we have spoken to see what they've been up to since we last spoke with them. There's also a tab for 7 Women, 7 Challenges, which we did in 2017. Then we have the Tough Girl blog, where all the show notes are kept and where I blog on a probably not that regular a blogger, but basically every Tuesday when a new episode of Tough Girl podcast comes out, a new blog post will come out related to that episode. Same on Thursday when Tough Girl Extra episodes come out. There's also a tab for books. So I've actually written 3 ebooks, one on the Marathon des Sables, one on working as a chalet host, and a third one on Tough Girl Top Tips, Life Lessons from the Tough Girl podcast. So you can be inspired and motivated by stories of adventure and challenge. So 40 of the toughest female adventurers in the world have shared top tips and advice to motivate and inspire you as you go after your own personal challenges. So there's links to those books on Amazon. I've also written I've also wrote the endorsement for Fantastic Female Adventurers, Truly Amazing Tales of Women Exploring the World. This book is absolutely epic. It's written by Lily Jew, and it's a collection of 14 exciting and inspirational stories from women around the world who go and share their incredible journeys. Now, a couple of the names are actually going to be really familiar with listeners to the Tough Girl podcast. So there's people like Anna McNuff in there, and Sarah Ooten. I'm trying to rack my brains to remember the others, but the book has been beautifully illustrated as well, and that was by Cecile Carroll. So that is Fantastic Female Adventurers. So I mean, to be honest, I love turning it over and seeing what I'd written on the back of the book. Like, absolutely, I was literally like, oh my god, this is amazing. So that's super, super exciting. And then I've already mentioned the Marathon des Sables book, Climbing Kilimanjaro, and then the chalet hosting book. So if you're thinking of getting away and want to do something completely different, then I share more about what I did on my ski season when I worked as a chalet host. So please do go check out toughgirlchallenges.com. Thank you again for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Tough Girl podcast. I really do appreciate it. Now, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, just have an awesome day. Give it your all, give it 110%. And I'll be back with you next Tuesday for another awesome episode of the Tough Girl podcast. All right, take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.